It was cold. Not hospital cold. Colder, the kind that seeps into your bones and stays. I remember staring at my phone screen, the harsh blue glow illuminating a message that sliced through me sharper than any blade. Effective immediately. You're no longer CEO. I read it twice. 3 times, my pulse roaring in my ears, drowning out the beep of medical monitors around me. My hands shook, and a numbness spread, heavy as concrete, pinning me helplessly to that sterile bed. I wasn't in an office or a boardroom. I was trapped here, helpless, tubes running into my veins, doctors murmuring in the hall, unaware that my world had shattered in silence, betrayed by people I trusted, by partners who'd once sat at my dinner table, laughed at my jokes, held my newborn son. How had loyalty turned so cold so fast? Stay till the end because what happens next will change everything. My name's Daniel. I'm 38 years old, born and raised in Seattle, and for most of my adult life, I've been a tech founder, the kind of guy who lives on caffeine, late-night emails, and that obsessive urge to build something that outlives him. I don't come from money. My dad worked shipping docks and my mom cleaned houses for over 2 decades. What they lacked, in wealth they made up for in grit. That's probably where I got my stubbornness from. I don't scare easy, I don't quit. I've always believed that loyalty, hard work, and taking care of your people meant something. I built my startup from my apartment floor, literally. My first server lived in a box fan-rigged closet. I didn't even have proper chairs when I made my first hire. We bootstrapped everything, pitched to investors wearing hoodies with pizza stains, pulled 18-hour days, and still managed to laugh at 2 a.m. over debugging disasters. That company was more than a business. It was my life's work. My fingerprints were in every line of code, every pitch deck, every late-night call with overseas clients. My wife used to joke that the company was our first child, and in a weird way, she was right. I've never been flashy. I don't wear watches, I can't pronounce or care much about the latest status symbols. What I do care about is doing things right. I'm the kind of person who calls back every client, remembers birthdays, and still sends handwritten thank you cards. I believe in building trust the long way. So when I brought on 2 co-founders, Eli and Mark, it wasn't just a business partnership. It was family. We shared profits, responsibilities, ideas, and the dream that we could change how small businesses used AI tools to compete with the big players. I'm also a father. My son Aaron just turned 8. He's the heartbeat of everything I do. When the long nights and pressure get to me, he's the reset button. And my wife Jenna, she's the glue. The one who saw me through bankruptcy scares, investor rejections, and the sleepless startup chaos. I leaned on her more than I probably should have. And for a long time I thought that loyalty I had for her, for the company, for the people around me, it was mutual. That we all had skin in the game, heart in the mission. But here's something I didn't talk about much back then. About a year before everything blew up, I started feeling off. Nothing big at first. Headaches, dizziness, random chest pains I brushed off as stress. Founders don't slow down, right? We push through. I kept going until my body literally gave out. One morning I collapsed at my desk. Turned out it was a cardiac event and I was rushed into emergency care. That moment changed everything, but not in the way I expected. While I was lying in that hospital bed recovering, still believing the company was running in good hands, that's when the knife came. Not quick, not clean, but slow and methodical. The same people I'd trusted with everything started whispering behind closed doors. What came next unraveled everything I thought I knew about trust, partnership, and just how far betrayal can reach. And maybe the worst part? I didn't see it coming. Not from them. Not like that. At first it was little things. You know the kind. Stuff that doesn't scream betrayal but nags at you in the back of your mind. It started about 6 months before I landed in the hospital. Mark, who'd always been the loudest advocate for transparency, suddenly started holding one-on-one meetings without looping me in. Just quick syncs, he said. Didn't want to bother you with the small stuff. Fair enough, I thought. We were scaling and delegation was part of the game. But it kept happening. Whole client conversations I wasn't part of. Decisions I'd find out about days after they were made. Then Eli, who handled most of our financial operations, began giving these vague answers during budget reviews. I'd ask about burn rate fluctuations or why we had an unusual spike in contractor costs, and he'd brush it off with, "It's just a temporary shift. Trust me, we're good. No hard numbers, no breakdowns. Just the kind of confident deflection that feels harmless until you realize it's a wall." And back then, I didn't press harder. I chalked it up to stress, workload, maybe even burnout. I didn't want to micromanage. We were supposed to trust each other. But the odd thing was how they started making me feel like I was the outsider. Subtle stuff. Strategy documents that never hit my inbox. Client debriefs that happened without me. Decisions made because you were resting or you've been so slammed lately. And it wasn't just them. I noticed a shift in the team too. People started tiptoeing around me, like I was suddenly fragile. Or worse, irrelevant. One moment in particular still sits in my gut. We were on a Zoom call with a new investor prospect, and halfway through the pitch, Mark just took over. Completely. Didn't hand it off. Didn't pause for my input. I sat there watching him close out the call like he was the CEO. When I brought it up after, he laughed it off. "You look tired, man. I was just covering for you." But his tone wasn't casual. It was patronizing. Like, I needed his permission to lead my own company. HR started shifting too. I got CC'd on fewer employee matters. A new clause showed up in one of our internal policy updates, something about executive incapacitation and interim authority. I flagged it to Eli and he just shrugged, said it was a standard update from legal. "You signed off on it in the doc," he added casually. But I hadn't. At least not knowingly. Either they'd slipped it in late or I'd been too buried to notice. And that's when the doubt crept in. Not full-blown paranoia, not yet, but unease. Like something foundational had shifted under my feet and I just hadn't figured out what it was yet. Jenna noticed it too. One night she asked me, "Why do you keep saying they when you talk about decisions now?" I didn't even realize I was doing it. But she was right. The we had quietly turned into a they, and once that happens in a founding team, something's already broken. Still, I kept pushing forward. I told myself it was just a rough patch, that once I got my health back on track, I'd step back in fully and reset the tone. I never thought I'd need to watch my back. Not with them. Not with the very people I'd built everything alongside, but the truth is, by the time I realized I needed to be more careful, it was already too late. It happened on a Tuesday morning, 9:42 a.m. to be exact. I was in a hospital recovery room, still groggy from the latest round of tests. My phone buzzed, an email notification. I almost didn't check it, thinking it was another generic update from the dev team or a Slack message, but it wasn't. The subject line read, "Board resolution. Immediate executive restructure." I opened it slowly, eyes skimming the legal-heavy text, trying to keep up with the cold formality. By the second paragraph, I realized what I was reading. Effective immediately, I was being removed from the CEO position. Due to sustained medical incapacity, they wrote. My responsibilities were to be transitioned for the sake of organizational continuity. The motion was backed by Mark and Eli. 2 signatures, 2 people. That was all it took. I read it again, this time slower. It wasn't just a decision. It was premeditated. They hadn't even called me. No conversation, no warning, no discussion about how to temporarily support me while I recovered. Just gone. I tried to sit up, heart pounding, pain rippling through my chest. The IV tugged as I moved too fast. The irony wasn't lost on me. My own body was failing me while my company, my life's work, was being stolen out from under me in real time. I tried to call Eli first, straight to voicemail, then Mark. Same thing. I checked Slack. My admin access was revoked. I couldn't even log into my own workspace. Not finance, not HR, not engineering. I was locked out of everything I had built, like I was some outside consultant who had overstayed his welcome. I wasn't even in the company directory anymore. My breathing got shallow, not from panic, but from something worse. Realization. This wasn't temporary, this wasn't precautionary. They'd planned this. They had waited for me to be too weak to fight back. And they struck. Clean, quiet, surgical. Just like any boardroom coup, except it was personal. Brutally personal. Jenna walked in just as I was rereading the email for the 10th time. She didn't even need to ask. She saw it on my face. What happened? I handed her the phone. She read it, then sat down in stunned silence. No tears. Just disbelief. And then the question that haunted me. Why would they do this now? I found out later they'd held a board meeting 2 days after my cardiac event. I'd been unconscious, literally, on painkillers hooked up to machines. They cited Clause 14B in our operating agreement, the one about succession planning in the event of incapacitation. The same clause I vaguely remembered Eli waving off months earlier when I questioned a policy update. Turns out, they'd amended that section quietly, making it much easier to declare someone unfit without formal medical documentation. All they needed was a unanimous determination by the board. And they were the board. In the weeks prior, they'd quietly restructured voting rights, brought on a silent partner who sided with them, pushed me out one small piece at a time until they had just enough leverage to do it legally. Technically, everything was by the book. Ethically, it was a hit job. They changed the branding within days. Scrubbed my name from the website, press kit, everything. I was being erased systematically. One by one, people stopped reaching out. My executive assistant ghosted. A developer I mentored for years unfollowed me on LinkedIn, like I'd died and they were just moving on. And then came the final blow. The buyout offer. A PDF attachment. No subject line. Per section 5.3, please find the initial valuation summary for your equity position. $147,000. That's what they offered me for 10 years of my life. For missing my son's first birthday because I was in a pitch meeting. For sleeping in the office. For betting everything on a vision they used to believe in with me. The offer came with a deadline, 72 hours. Failure to accept will trigger arbitration. That was their language. Arbitration. As if this was some kind of negotiation. As if I had a choice. I didn't eat for days after that. Couldn't sleep. Not because of the money. Not even because of the title. But because of the why. These were people I'd broken bread with. People I had protected when investors doubted us. I gave them my trust, my blueprint, my passwords, my home. And they used every inch of that access to rip me out of my own company. There's a kind of silence that follows betrayal. It's not rage. Not yet. It's hollow. Like the inside of a bell after it's rung. You keep waiting for sound to come back, but it doesn't. You're just left sitting with the echo. And that was the moment. That stillness. That space between the pain and the anger. That's when something inside me shifted. Because if they thought I was going to lie down and vanish quietly, they didn't know me at all. I didn't respond to their buyout offer. I let the 72 hours pass in silence. No legal threat, no angry email, just silence. Because rage makes noise, but revenge, real revenge, happens in silence. And I wasn't interested in justice anymore. I was interested in something cleaner. Control. First, I called my lawyer, not the firm that handled our startup's paperwork. A different one. A close friend of my cousin's who specialized in digital intellectual property and corporate restructuring. We started combing through everything. Old contracts, original IP filings, the source code repositories, even Slack exports I still had access to from my personal archives. You'd be surprised how careless people get when they think they've already won. They never changed the licensing on the core AI engine. My code, still registered under my name. I had built that model years before the startup was even formed, and we had integrated it into the company under a licensing deal that granted use, not ownership. Their first mistake. Second phase was digital forensics. I hired a private cybersecurity consultant, expensive but worth it. We pulled metadata from our development tools, confirming that much of the foundational code was still reliant on my original scripts. They hadn't even refactored it. The audit report we put together was airtight, time-stamped commits, licensing agreements, and usage logs. Legally, they had no right to continue using the engine if I revoked their license. Which I did, quietly. Through my lawyer, we sent a cease and desist order directly to their hosting provider, triggering an internal review. Their back-end systems went dark for 36 hours. Clients noticed. That was the first crack, but I wasn't done. The third phase was financial. I still had access to a personal shell company I'd created for early vendor agreements, an entity we used before we had official banking channels. Turns out, they'd never terminated a few of those legacy contracts, including one critical payment processor API key that linked through my corporation's name. One polite call and a submitted request, and I froze the API. Transactions stopped processing for 3 key clients. Invoices backed up. Refunds failed. Tension rose. Behind the scenes, I was building something new. I quietly launched a small, side venture under a new name with a few of the original engineers who had quietly reached out after my departure. Turns out, they weren't as loyal to Eli and Mark as those two thought. People talk, especially when leaders shift from collaborative to cutthroat. We took the original engine, added a new UI, streamlined the functionality, and started targeting the same clients with a better offer. I didn't need to convince them with stories. I had proof. Performance benchmarks, cost savings, and full support from the guy who built the damn thing. Mark and Eli panicked when they caught wind of the new platform. I know this because one of their former account managers forwarded me an internal email marked, "High priority, competitor response needed." My favorite part? They referred to me as the original founder. Not a threat. Not a partner. Not a coworker. A ghost. And the ghost was outperforming them. Then came the legal fallout. Remember the operating agreement clause they used to oust me? Turns out, the amendments were rushed through in a vote that didn't follow proper protocol. One of our early angel investors, who still had voting rights and had been completely left out, got wind of it. She wasn't pleased. She filed a formal challenge, and once legal reviewed the bylaws and timelines, the entire vote was flagged for procedural misconduct. That alone didn't reinstate me, but it triggered an arbitration hearing they couldn't afford. During arbitration, everything came out. The under-the-table clause changes, the manipulation of board votes, the fact that they'd continued using IP they no longer had rights to. Their defense crumbled, and by the end of it, not only did they settle for a much higher figure, $2.4 million in equity buyback, but they had to sign over their shares in the new venture I'd spun up. It wasn't just revenge, it was a hostile reacquisition dressed in legalese. But here's what I didn't expect: the emptiness. I got what I wanted. I got the IP, the money, the clients, the upper hand. But standing in the ruins of what I'd built, with different people, different branding, and no illusion of loyalty left, there was no celebration. Just quiet. Cold, factual, undeniable quiet. Still, I'd learned something critical. Power isn't in the position, it's in the patience, in the long game. In knowing exactly where the wires run, which contracts matter, and who still answers your call when the dust settles. And just when you think the story is over, there's one more thing. A junior dev who had stayed behind with Eli and Mark, one I had mentored personally, sent me a message weeks after the arbitration closed, just 3 lines. I thought they were right. I see now they weren't. Thank you for not burning the whole place down. That's when it hit me. I could have. I had every reason to. But I didn't. Because revenge isn't about destruction. It's about taking back what was yours, and knowing exactly why you deserve it. In the months that followed, things settled. Not quickly, not perfectly, but they did. The new company gained traction faster than I expected. We kept it lean, focused, and quietly began reclaiming our space in the market. I didn't plaster my name all over it. I didn't make announcements or seek headlines. That part of me, the one who needed recognition, got burned out in the fire. What I wanted now was stability, control, peace, not applause. Eli and Mark? Last I heard, they split. One tried to pivot into a new venture but couldn't land any serious funding. Word travels fast in tech, especially when your former co-founder wins an arbitration ruling against you for misconduct. The other moved out of state entirely. They were never sued publicly. No jail time. No massive public reckoning. But the silence that followed them was louder than any press release. People knew. Reputations crumble not with explosions but with absence. When your phone stops ringing, when your name gets skipped in rooms where decisions are made. I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good at first. Watching from a distance as they scrambled to recover, realizing they were no longer the power players they once thought they were. But over time that feeling faded. It wasn't satisfaction, it was closure. And with that came something unexpected. Forgiveness. Not for what they did. That will never be excused. But for what I let myself become in response to it. The anger, the obsession, the months of plotting. It changed me, hardened me. And now I'm learning how to soften again. My health came back slowly. I made space for it. I cut the late nights, added actual weekends to my calendar. I walk my son to school now. I cook dinner more often. Jenna and I took a long vacation. First one in years that didn't involve a pitch deck or a strategic planning. Doc. And I don't flinch when I hear Slack notifications anymore. That alone tells me something healed. Strangely, the story didn't end with me. A few months after arbitration, I got an email from a young founder I'd spoken to years ago. Someone who had been watching from the sidelines. He told me he'd recently faced pressure from his board to sign over certain rights while going through cancer treatment. He said, "Your story made me pause. I got a second opinion on my health and my business. You probably saved my company." That message shook me. It reminded me why I'd started all this in the first place, not for money, not for legacy, but to build something honest. And to protect people who build the right way. If there's anything I learned from this, it's this. People will try to take what's yours when they think you're too weak to stop them. But what they can't take, unless you hand it over, is your voice, your principles, and your will. To fight back. The company they tried to steal from me? It's thriving, under a different name, with a different structure, and a different soul. But the DNA's the same. It's mine. And I'm finally okay with how the story turned out. Peace. Isn't quiet, it's earned. Would you have done the same in my shoes?